Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, in this episode, Kohberger Alibi craziness. Can you believe it? He needs more time to decide whether to submit an alibi defense or not. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button and let's get started. Now, imagine if you were suspected of quadruple murder. You are suspected of quadruple murder and you're innocent and you had an alibi. Would you want to wait longer than 7 months before revealing your alibi? I mean, you're sitting in jail. You're already sitting in jail. You've appeared in court a few times. Your life is completely on hold and you're going, I think I'll hold on to my alibi for a little longer. Does that make sense? Most reasonable people wouldn't play it this way if they were innocent. On the other hand, as we saw in the Murdoch case, he waited until very late to change his alibi version of events. And of course, in that case, Paul Porsche's Snapchat video sealed his papa's fate. I've just put up a video dealing with Papa's attempts to appeal his conviction. Now, I don't think the Idaho students case is nearly as tricky as the Murdoch case or the Vallow case. I think the tricky part is all the peripheral stuff, the survivors, the victims' families, the fact that you have to have a high-profile murder trial of a student with 4 knife victims who are also students in the middle of a student community, in the middle of a semester in a small university town. That is the part that makes it quite tricky. Now, in terms of the article by the Mail Online, quote, in their latest court filings, Kohberger's attorneys asked the court for an extension in their decision whether or not to present an alibi. It is in response to a state law, obviously Idaho state law, that requires attorneys to submit their intention to provide an alibi before a trial gets underway, end quote. That's interesting, isn't it? Are state laws with regard to this different in other states? I'd be interested to know. Going back to the article, quote, they say, that's the defense lawyers say, that the discovery involved in the case has been voluminous, right? And that they are still, and that it's still ongoing, and that they need more time to wade through the evidence before finalizing their defense strategy and notifying the court of it. Now, I can tell you, I've sat in on murder trials, and usually what happens is the accused or the defendant goes first and says, well, this is what happens. It's always worrying when they wait for all the evidence to be led, and then they come in right at the end, as Alex Murdaugh did, as Henry von Bredar did. So their explanation is they first need to know what the cops have on him before he can provide an alibi. Again, a little like Murdaugh, except Murdaugh provided an alibi. The prosecution then disproved it, and then he tried to provide another alibi that sort of accommodated the damning evidence from the defense, right? The damning evidence from the prosecution, and then it didn't work. So is Kohberger's strategy going to work? Is Kohberger on the right track to sort of get all the information and then perhaps volunteer an alibi and perhaps not? Perhaps he also wants to see how strong the case is against him. According to the Mail Online, quote, at his most recent hearing on Friday, Kohberger's attorneys argued against lifting a gag order which prevents attorneys from speaking about the case publicly. But the family of one of the victims, Kaylee Gonzalez, says it restricts them too. Kohberger's team also argued that he's being overanalyzed. They say the media are going to find a way to negatively write about him. And they say the attention this case is receiving is grotesque. Well, I think high-profile true crime is generally a grotesque circus these days. And so I think gag orders are one of the few weapons courts have at their disposal to curtail the scale and scope of this grotesquerie. Another sort of tool at their disposal is keeping cameras outside of the courtroom to ensure the trial stays inside the court rather than playing out in the court of public opinion, as it so often does in high-profile cases. So I'm not going to take it further than that, except to deal with the DNA aspect, and I want to deal with it via this tweet from Jennifer Coffindaffer, who's ex-law enforcement, ex-FBI. And she made a couple of points in this tweet from June 10th, about 4 days ago. At the time that I saw it, the tweet had been viewed over 2,500 times. And one of the points she made in the tweet was to say, he likely wouldn't have been caught for a long time but for the sheath, meaning Kohberger wouldn't have been caught for a long time but for the sheath. I think what she means is but for the DNA on the sheath. Now, I tend to disagree. In addition to the DNA found at the scene, police linked Kohberger to the crime through his car. So in addition to the DNA, the CCTV of his vehicle doing the rounds, not just one camera, it's multiple cameras in multiple locations, effectively tracking his vehicle, circling towards the scene and then driving away from the scene, and doing that several times on one particular night. And that's one night. There were also other days as well. So besides that, we also have his cell phone doing the rounds with his vehicle, basically coordinated with his vehicle at the same time. So I would argue, even without DNA, the cops could build an extremely strong case against Kohberger. You might say there are many other vehicles and mobile phones moving through the neighborhood, but I don't know if you can say they were moving to and from 1122 King Road when Kohberger was at that time of the morning. It was a quiet night, according to what the authorities said, unusually quiet night. And if you go into that sort of, that kind of whirl, it's kind of almost like a, it's a dead-end cul-de-sac in a way. There's also a limited amount of vehicles that would be at the center of that whirl, if that makes sense. It's not like it's a thoroughfare. It's a dead end, a sort of a, I can't give it another, it's almost like a snail-shaped whirl that ends in a cul-de-sac. So the amount of vehicles at the center of that are going to be very, very limited, a handful of them. And so again, what is his vehicle doing there? What is his vehicle doing at 4 a.m. in Moscow, Idaho, on the morning of the murders in that neighborhood, when his vehicle really belongs outside a residence in Pullman, Washington? I mean, what is he even doing in Moscow? And so I suppose you could ask some fair questions. Did he have friends there? Well, if so, who are they? Did he know anyone there? Well, if so, who? And then also, why did he make so many other visits there on other occasions? So what we have here is his moon white vehicle swimming around 1122 King Road 3 times in the dark on the night of the murders. That is a serious question he's facing. You have a white Hyundai Elantra matching the one he drives, filmed in the vicinity of the crime scene in the hours before and after the gruesome quadruple killings. I mean, another thing to mention is even after his vehicle apparently came back to that neighborhood, I think it was around about 1 p.m. And so besides the vehicle being seen, besides that, you have an actual eyewitness inside the scene. One of the victim's housemates came face to face with a killer. She also told police that she recognized Kohberger's bushy eyebrows. In other words, when she looked at the real Kohberger, or a photo of Kohberger, right, she recognized the face that she saw that night. And so while Kohberger is yet to submit a plea or defense, he's always vowed to fight the case. Well, he might be vowing to fight the case, but you'd think the logical place to start would be an alibi. Well, good luck, but please don't tell me that DNA is how and why he was caught, or how and why he could be or should be convicted. the probative value of other evidence is equal to the DNA, if not more, inculpatory. And that brings us to this question, what exculpatory evidence is there really? Even without the DNA, the case against him is still extremely strong. With the DNA, I'd wager it's well nigh indefensible. But this is a kid with a PhD in criminology, so I guess we're about to find out just how smart he thinks he is. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.